Welcome back to Normal Island. I'm Curtis Daly and I'm joined by Helena, aka No Justice MGG. How the devil are you this evening?
I'm not doing too bad. I've got a can of Iron Brew. So all of the Scots in the
Ainbury.
audience, you're absolutely welcome. It's good to see everybody and looking forward to the show.
Do you know what? I don't know who else drinks Iron Brew. So is it something you've always liked to drink?
I fucking love Iron Brew. One of the LGSs, one of the local game stores in our area, they
Yeah.
have it on draft. They've got Iron Brew on draft.
Well, I don't think I could drink a pint of that, to be fair. But
I mean, I can get through loads of this stuff. And since they cut down the sugar content, since the sugar tax came in, right? It's not even that. It's what is it? 4.5 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters. So it's not even that calorific.
I've always been a
That's
basic
sugar
bitch.
tax.
I've always been a basic bitch. Growing up, it was always Coke for me, and now it's Dr. Pepper. But you know what? The Scots love it, and if you love it, you know, it's free advertisement for Iron Brew.
I mean, you know, proper British drink. There we go.
There you go. Because we yeah, I was gonna make a dumbass joke, but I'm not funny enough to do that. Probably people don't want to natter on about, you know, fizzy drinks. They want to hear about politics, don't they? So this is what we've got coming up on tonight's show. UKIP leader calls for political opponents to be hanged. Reform wants to remove rights for immigrants. And Israel planned to put Greta Thunberg in a terror cell. As always, remember to like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. We'll be getting to your comments at the end. So, of course, you always are, but I like to say it every single time. Make sure you're busy in the chat. But let's go on to our first story. The leader of UKIP, Nick Tenconi, made a speech in front of supporters where he called for political opponents to be hanged.
I say, when we deport the invaders, when we remigrate the communists, we ensure we give the British public a referendum on the death penalty. And the monsters, the Islamist monsters who rape and murder our girls, and the traitors in government, all of them, if found guilty, should face the noose in Parliament Square.
So as you heard there, he said that traitors should face the noose. Now, elsewhere in the speech, he called for communists to be deported.
I will declare war on far-left extremism and the communists. I will carry out deportations of the communists, begin remigration, and send them to North Korea.
So even if you're born here, right, you're not an immigrant, he wants to deport people to North Korea for being communists. This is literally straight up Nazi rhetoric, right? The Nazis persecuted socialists, trade unionists, and communists, all right? Communists are the direct opposite of Nazis. Now, if you think I'm being hyperbolic, this is Tenconi recently doing a Nazi salute. He's also dancing like a bellend. He was doing the Donald Trump dance. But not only that, look at his armband. I mean, why would he do that, right? Have a look at the comparison. He knows exactly what he's doing. The only difference I can see is that he's bold. Now, we can see his online behavior, right? Telling people to go home for not being white. This is him saying it's the Green Party's Mothin Alley. And by the way, it's not the first time he's done it. He's done it loads of times. He said it to various people such as Ash Sarkar and Narinder Kaur. Now, this is him saying he supports remigration. So I've called for remigration since day one of becoming leader. Those who have British citizenship but do not belong here are going home. All right, so you heard that. Even if you have citizenship, and he says if you don't belong here. Now, of course, what belong is entirely what he thinks belonging means. Now, what is remigration? Remigration is a far-right European concept of ethnic cleansing via the mass deportation of non-white immigrants and their descendants, sometimes including those born in Europe, to their place of racial ancestry. It is popular, especially within the identitarian movements. Now, look, to me, this shows that reform are not the biggest threat. It's what comes after, right? Reform winning, and I do think they're going to win the next election, I think it means the Overton window is going to shift again. And more people are going to fall into the Nazi propaganda and white supremacy. These ideologies, I think, are going to be far more emboldened. Now, our current Overton window is basically the centre-right to far-right nationalism. So the centre-right is like the left part of the Overton window. It's not left-wing, but it's the left part of it, right? There is no real left-wing discourse in the mainstream. And the right think that this government is left-wing, because if you're far-right, bloody everything looks left-wing. But this government, to me, it's centre-right, with some things actually being firmly on the right, like their attack on trans people. Helena, this government prescribed Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation, despite posing no threat to people. The current UKIP leader is a Nazi. Like, he's literally a Nazi, and is calling people to face the noose. So shouldn't UKIP be prescribed as terrorists?
I mean, I don't think that either of them should be prescribed as terrorists, basically because I don't agree with the stifling of free speech that the prescription legislation allows for. Obviously, what's happened with Palestine Action has led to even the discussion of talk about the actions of Palestine Action being potentially difficult. There's a chilling effect. When in reality, if you do prescribe these kind of people, if you seen all of the different kind of neo-Nazi groups across the country, you want to prescribe one group, another one will pop up in its place. It will change its rhetoric. It will use the same kind of euphemisms that were the preserve of the far right. For example, in America, you look at the quote that came from the kind of Jim Crow era, so you can't say the N-word anymore, so you use different euphemisms. This has been a thing that 4chan have perfected. It's been in the background of politics, both here and across the pond, since 2015, 2014. The reality is that trying to push one group out of the mainstream will result in another group existing in its place. It doesn't solve the problem, it just pushes it into the long grass to be found later down the line. And the worst part about all of this is that it makes these people feel like martyrs. It will raise the profile of these people and allow them to spread their message. For example, when this idea that sunlight is the best disinfectant, you look, for example, at Nick Griffin in his time as a leader of the BNP. They were seen as a fringe party, but there was a slow rise in their popularity. And the thought was, we'll put them on Question Time, and we'll give the platform for him to be exposed as the bigot and the charlatan and the monster that he is. And the reality is that he did have a terrible result on Question Time. Him being there, being the public eye, it being a prominent part of the discourse, whether it was bad for him or not, the reality is that the extra exposure increased support for the BNP, despite the fact that it was bad for him. So the exposure of people like Nick Tenconi and his rhetoric, further being emboldened by being martyred, by feeling that their free speech has been taken away through the use of prescription legislation, would only lead to the widening of the platform that can be used to spout the same rhetoric, even it's not being done via the same group or via the same person or via the same political party. And the reality, of course, is that if you fold this into the current style of politics, you look at Reform UK, and the points you made about these people being emboldened and this rhetoric being mainstreamed, Nigel Farage's line throughout the election, and it's what he's basically been using, whether he was leader of the UKIP, whether he was leader of the Brexit Party or Reform UK, is actually, I am the thing that has stopped the far right in this country. My existence as a politician, of giving their right-wing movement in this country, like the far right movement in this country, a mainstream party to soften the rhetoric. I've always opposed people like Tommy Robinson, for example. Well, the reality is that the longer that Nigel Farage has been a mainstream figure in politics, the more these people have had their rhetoric in the public sphere. This idea that Nigel Farage being a mainstream politician is a silencing of the far right by there being a mainstream right-wing anti-migration party, that's just not been the case. We have seen riots on the streets, we've seen masked men going into asylum hotels, and now we're seeing open neo-Nazi rhetoric and neo-Nazi hand gestures and a desire for like open ethno-nationalism, right? Ethnic cleansing being made by what was once a political party that got 12% in the polls in 2015, for example. Nigel Farage's claim to being the person who silences the far right is just totally without merit, because all we've seen as you've mentioned before, of moving the Overton window, right, is more of these people being given a platform and seeing their rhetoric mirrored in mainstream politics, with the mass deportation shit going under the Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef planning, and what we've seen, for example, coming out of America as well in the Trump regime. The idea that having a centre-right idea of the anti-migration party, again, all it's done is allow these people to feel like that they've been vindicated in terms of the ways in which that their rhetoric and their policies should be part of the mainstream discourse in this country.
Yeah. So I hear you, what you're saying about in terms of, sort of freedom of speech, and also what utility does it hold to prescribe them as terrorists. What I do find incredibly funny, though, is the double standard from this government, though, because they've obviously prescribed Palestine Action. I don't think they're going to prescribe UKIP. Now, to me, who's more of a danger to society? It's UKIP, but they won't do that. So I think there's a double standard there. You're also absolutely right about Farage not being the antidote to the far right, because I think people like Farage and Reform have just been more clever in the way they address these policies. It's through dog whistles. To touch upon what you said about, was it the Redditors, and they said that, you know, you can't use the N-word or whatever, and they've used dog whistles. Surely, though, in that instance, it's better they can't say it. So even though dog whistles are used to communicate with each other, it's kind of like political correctness, right? I think that political correctness served the purpose, because you made people feel uncomfortable to say these things, and actually it didn't spread as much. So is there not an argument to say we could censor these extreme voices, because even if they have to resort to using dog whistles, it's not apparent to the wider public, which means it seems like that racism is on the downward trend. Now, that's obviously doesn't necessarily mean it's the case, but I see it in terms of comparing it to political correctness. If you make people feel uncomfortable saying it, then at least there's some utility there.
Well, I think that is right, but that's got to come from social stigma rather than from the hands of the state. Because in reality, as you mentioned before, and that's the Redditors and the Nazis in the background were using these dog whistles. And when you look at America, for example, it was powerful enough for them to have the Unite the Right rally. The people with the tiki torches chanting "Jews will not replace us," right? That was born out of what Richard Spencer, the famous neo-Nazi, said was that they'd memed it into existence using Pepe the Frog as a unifying symbol for the 4chan style neo-Nazis, forcing them to do it in code, whilst it may stop it from going further than the online circles. It has at the very least been a calling card amongst them. But as I said, I think social stigma is the way they would do it. One thing I will say, one thing I think is really worth touching on here too, given that we're making this comparison to Palestine Action, for example, is that when you look at the talk about remigration, when you hear the stuff that comes out of the tweets that you put up there, going back to this perceived kind of racial ancestral homeland, for example, where have you heard the term ancestral homeland before? Well, who are the most prominent people in society talking about the necessity of an ancestral homeland? This idea that somehow every ethnicity has a place in the world, has a strip of land specifically that they belong in. Is it weird how the far right seem to really love Israel? Well, that's the reality. It's the reason why they like Israel. It's because it's the model ethno-state. It is, they believe that there is some kind of link between like an ethnic group and some kind of land, which is a preposterous idea to me. And it's their justification of saying, well, if we can get all the Jews out of Europe and into Israel, which is what was the meaning of the Balfour Declaration, it's anti-Semites wanting Jews out of Europe, essentially, It's the justification for saying, well, all this ethnic group belong in this area of the world. Well, that means that all people of a certain ethnic group in the UK also belong back in the subcontinent, back in the Middle East, back in Africa, because that's where their ancestral homeland is. As if somehow, just because your ethnic group had ethnogenesis in a certain region, that means that that's where these people should live forever. Obviously it's a nonsensical idea, but this is why we have to push back against the Zionist narrative being mainstreamed. And that's why we've seen these things all kind of interlink at the same time, is because fundamentally the central part of the modern remigration narrative and the Zionism as anti-colonialism stuff is that it's all this comes from this basic idea that somehow land is connected to ethnicity, when it just isn't. This is what they're trying to say. Like, England is for the English ethnic group specifically, rather than a nation of people or a community of people who live amongst each other regardless of their ethnicity, which is what Britain and England means to me. It's the people who I live with. It's the communities that I'm a member of. It's not any kind of ethnic group. And that's what fundamentally why you get this rhetoric of people being traitors, people undermining the nation, because fundamentally they see it as an ethnic identity rather than a community identity, right? And neoliberalism has caused an absence of a collective understanding of society, which has allowed there to be a power vacuum, an ideological vacuum for collectivists to fill it in the replacement of class politics with white identitarian politics. So we really need to get our act together to ensure that we can give people an other narrative on why Starmer capitulating and refusing to engage in class politics has been the best gift that the right wing, that the far right especially, have had politically in this country. There's no counter narrative for an opposition to neoliberalism other than white nationalism and ethno-nationalism and white identitarianism.
Yeah, that point you're making, like class politics is fundamental to this rise of extremism, or the lack of class politics, right? But the question I have for you, right now, it feels like the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? Labour could bring in some really good changes. In fact, they've recently announced that they're going to expand childcare from 15 to 30 hours, right? And they could bring in some sweeping changes, but I feel like it's too late, you know? Do you think that a left-wing party can only take on this far-right radicalism? Because Labour have destroyed all its goodwill. So even in the next year or two, they start making some popular policies. It's like like I said, the toothpaste is at the tube. The radicalism is already there.
I mean, we're already seeing globally, internationally, but especially within the global north, the collapse of the liberal capitalist order that was formed in the wake of the Second World War. Like, at least in terms of like the liberal basis of this, that's all collapsing, but it is collapsing because there has been no shackles on capitalism in a post-neoliberal world. The social democratic post-war consensus, the New Deal, which you would call it in the United States, for example, that all got blown apart by the free trade era in the 1980s. And of course, there has been no counterweight since the fall of communism in 1991, essentially, to force the capitalist West to be able to give something back to its citizens rather than allow rampant capitalist subsuming of the wealth of these nations into the hands of very, very few. This was the reality that Marx talked about, right? In terms of the division between capital and labour, and the reality of what would happen if capitalism was untethered and unchained. And so, given that it's essentially expanded as far as it can in terms of the consent of the people who live in these societies to watch all of the assets of the world be subsumed by even fewer and fewer people, it was always going to end up leading to fascism. It's capitalism in decay. The reality is, if we want to look at the future where the global liberal capitalist order is breaking down, there is only two options. There is socialism and there is barbarism. And given there is no socialist alternative, at time of recording, outside of, I guess, hopefully Zach Polanski wins the leadership election, the Green Party tomorrow, people are turning to barbarism because there seems to be no alternative.
Absolutely true. Could not disagree with that. It is socialism or barbarism. We need to smash the oligarchs. We need socialism. But that wraps up that story. Let's move on to our second story. Richard Tice said live on LBC that he would be happy to see rights removed from immigrants.
People who have lived here, however long they've lived here, if they're not British citizens, would have fewer rights than people who were British citizens under your plans.
And frankly, that's not an unreasonable proposition. Of course, we'll debate it. We'll look at the specific detail.
You probably more than any politician have warned about two-tier justice in this country in recent months. That is the epitome of two-tier justice. Whether you have rights and which rights you have would depend on whether you were a citizen or not. That's two-tier justice in action.
A British citizen is a British citizen. Someone who is a foreign national, by definition, that is a two-tier structure. They're not a British citizen.
Even if they've lived here for 40 years.
And look, we will look at all the specific detail of how long someone has lived here. But I don't think it's unreasonable to reiterate, and this is why I think one of the reasons we're leading in the polls, we tell it as it is. Our job is to focus on advancing the interests of the British people, British citizens, and to make people better off and improve the quality of housing and public services. And that's what we're focused on.
I mean, first of all, him saying we tell it like it is it's a complete lie. One thing's the fact that Richard Tice calls net zero net stupid zero, even though he has a company that invests in green technology. Rupert Lowe, who, all right, he's not a Reform MP anymore, but he was a Reform MP. He also says that net zero is stupid. The guy has solar panels on his farm, right? And he says green energy is more expensive. The reason why he has solar panels on his farm, the official reason, you can look it up, is because it's cheaper, right? So they're fucking liars. Now, look, I don't have much time for Ben Kentish, by the way, but I felt like he absolutely nailed Tice here, right? Reform bang on about two-tiered justice. And here he is saying, well, I'm not opposed to certain people having more rights than others. So what happened to equality under the law, right? You could have someone live here their entire lives, have a family, contribute immensely, and that will never matter because of a piece of paper. Yet you could be a British citizen, be born here, who their entire lives commits crime, and they will have more rights. Now, this is the thing that I've argued time and time again, right? When you have a political project that is solely based around talking about immigration, right? Even if they are just talking about illegal immigration, which is actually called undocumented migration, right? This is what they mean under the surface. They are lying when they say that immigration is fine. It's just the illegals. For Reform, for Tice, for Lowe, for others, they just don't like immigration, right? They started with just illegal immigration to push the debate. Once that's done, you notice that they then start to talk about legal migration. Helena, this is former Reform leader. He's an MP, high-profile figure, is not opposing two-tier justice, doesn't want equality under the law, favouring some people's rights over others. How are they anything but far right?
It's worth pointing out this kind of citizen, non-citizen distinction in terms of who is justified to have more rights. This is a cultural import from America. This is a Trumpian import, right? So much of this stuff, again, Reform UK, they're British patriots that they apparently say that's what they call themselves. Half of their policy is just stuff that they've borrowed from the Trump regime. It's just imported cultural shit in cultural terms from the United States as well, and bringing it over to the UK, saying, well, actually, the reality is we need to talk about British citizens first. Actually, well, no, actually, you need to make sure that the actual society itself within the borders is as best it can be. Because in, for example, a country like the United States, the only real distinction, given that it's always been a kind of melting pot, is citizen versus non-citizen, right? You even hear from the Americans themselves, the Trump supporters, when you have this discussion, for example, about the First Amendment, like their access to the free speech rights. They'll say, oh, well, these only apply to citizens. Mahmoud Khalil, he wasn't a citizen, so he doesn't get those rights. And that's the thing, right? There's this distinction in terms of who does or doesn't get rights. Again, it's not down to a shared sense of humanity that everyone has together, but it's based upon the relationship to the state itself. And that's really worth pointing out, in that whilst the kind of conservatism, the neoliberal conservatism that we've seen over the past 45 years actually hasn't really strayed away from that, because the fundamental basis is that, well, everyone's the same under the market. Within the neoliberal, like, market supremacist order, right? We all have equal rights because we're all just participants in a market. Rather than, for example, on the left-wing side of this, we all do agree everyone has the same human rights, and the nation state shouldn't be the arbiter of whose rights matter where, is because we have a shared humanity. We share a planet together. We share the international community, right? At least that's where a lot of liberals and leftists will agree, is in the importance of every human within the international community. It's this reason why it's the weaponization of state power, but it's coming from the right, who would usually balk at the idea of state power, which is, again, it's anti-neoliberal. And I think that calling it at least somewhat far right, it's definitely on the cusp, because it's not necessarily ethno-nationalist in the way that, for example, the clip we'd seen earlier today is. Saying that citizens versus non-citizens is a distinction is specific insofar as it doesn't necessarily mean those who are born here but are of different ethnicities, which would be the hallmark of far-right politics. It's not palingenetic ultranationalism like we'd seen earlier today. Is it far-right? No, but in my mind, but what I would definitely describe it as, it's certainly far right adjacent in terms of the kind of rhetoric they're trying to move towards and the kind of politics that would try and foment within society. But what it certainly is a move towards a less universal form of governance, a less universal form of how we distribute rights within the country than what we'd seen from neoliberal conservatism of the recent past.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always kind of looked at Reform as not a far right party. It's hard right, and I think there's fascists within it. Like Rupert Lowe, to me, is quintessentially a white supremacist and fascist, right? And he,
Yes.
he didn't get kicked out of the Reform Party for his views on that, did he?
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out, I think the distinction I would make is that they're populist and dissident right. I've been saying in terms of rhetoric, in terms of where they've decided to go on policy, I think the Conservative Party are probably to the right of Reform UK at the moment. I would actually be given the Conservative Party's kind of basis in the long-term aristocracy of this country, that their position as part of the establishment. I would say that they're closer to being far right than Reform UK are. This kind of populist dissident right wing, it's certainly different. And again, everything's on the cusp at the moment in terms of the rhetoric that we're seeing. Yeah. But you look at the kind of the way in which they structure, especially economic policy. There's a syncretic nature to Reform's politics that you don't see in the Conservatives. I
think though, so the reason why I'm, especially on that clip there, where I'm starting to think maybe they are far right, is I completely agree that ethno-nationalism is what kind of defines you as far right. But I think this obsession about citizenship is almost like a dog whistle into what we really mean as white people. Now, by the way, I don't think, and this is my view, I don't think Reform, if they're going to win, they're suddenly going to pivot to far-right politics and enact ethno-nationalism. I don't think that. But what I do think is a lot of their policies are underpinned by that idea, even if they don't really realise it themselves. That's what I think, which means they could be far-right. Usually I would say Reform are hard-right. Maybe I'll sort of swing between both. It depends on what I hear, but from what I heard from Tice, I thought it was pretty far right. But here's what I want to ask you. Reform, I think, are going to fail on their own goals, right? They said they were going to deport 650,000 people. I don't think they're going to do that. But even if they deport a handful of asylum seekers, people's lives won't get better. So do you think Reform failing in government means people will swing further to the right and look at UKIP? Or do you think they could go to the left, and by that time the Greens could be far bigger, and your party, if they get their act together, could be a real force?
I couldn't look into the future and tell you, but I think you're very right in your assessment that they will get into government, and we'll see what's happening with Trump at the moment, where comes in, deports a bunch of people, enacts terrible economic policies that ruin the lives of people in the country, and people are still angry, people are still mad, people are very unhappy in the United States. Is it necessarily leading people leftwards? I mean, time will tell. But the far right in America, they've not disappeared. The MAGA cult is still there. They've bought into the rhetoric, and I'm assuming 5 years of Reform UK and opposition essentially leading the government, and the government giving them credence. At least when Joe Biden was the president, genocide aside, right? Which I don't like having to say that, but we just want to take things in isolation in terms of policy. He didn't try and chase Trump, at least not until the election period, in the way that Keir Starmer is chasing Nigel Farage right now. There was at least some amount of a counterweight there, whereas Keir Starmer is just essentially allowing Nigel Farage to lead him, and that's allowing there to be this huge consensus politics over the kind of demonization of asylum seekers and refugees that it will only reach fever pitch. And people, when they see that one round of deportations of asylum seekers has failed, or refugees, because there will have to be basically everybody, even with settled refugee status, to hit their number of 600,000, right? And the country will still be in the shit. The economy will still be worse. The economy will be worse under Reform UK than it is currently at the moment. And without there being a counterweight in terms of actual political power, actual people out there to be able to enforce policies that would be able to show that there's a different way, it will seem to me that a good 60 to 70% of political parties by their electorate representation will be essentially giving Farage his due props for the policies that he's doing. And if they fail, my assumption is they'll want to go further. They'll want to see more of it or we've not deported enough because there's no opposition to it. At least there's not a big enough opposition in terms of the broader electorate, rather than saying, well, this policy has failed, we need something else.
Yeah, and I think probably if I were to, I hate making political predictions, right? You should never do that. But if I were to look and see, I think reform are going to fail on their own terms, right? A failure of government doesn't usually swing people to the left. Often it's to the right. It has to be met with a left alternative. So I guess really it's not that, we tried reform and they failed. I guess we're going to go left wing again. Unfortunately, that doesn't really happen. And you make a good point about Trump. I mean, look how terrible he's doing. But people haven't suddenly become socialist or left wing. Usually, when governments fail, I think they usually swing to the right because they lose trust in institutions, right, and especially the state. So I think it does really hinge upon the fact that if Zach Polansky wins tomorrow, I expect he will win. The Green Party does really well, and whatever happens with your party. But let's leave that there. Before we go into our final story, I just want to say, remember to like the stream, and if you're not a subscriber, hit that button, right? If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you can become a YouTube member for just 99p. Now, on to our last story. Israel came up with a plan to detain Greta Thunberg in a terror cell. Israeli ministers are drawing up plans to detain Greta Thunberg in terrorist-level conditions after the Swedish activist left Spain on Sunday on the largest flotilla yet bound for Gaza. But Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, is planning to present Benjamin Netanyahu with a plan to detain the activists in harsh terrorist-level conditions. Israel Hayom quoted individuals close to Mr. Ben-Gvir saying, "They'll be sorry about the time they arrive. We must eliminate their appetite for another attempt." Now, this came after Greta Thunberg and others, including Navarro Media's Kieran Andrio, announced that they would be sailing on a humanitarian flotilla to Gaza. Unfortunately for the depraved Ben-Gvir, he may have to wait longer to enact his sickening plan to put people in terror cells for supporting humanitarian efforts, as a storm temporarily halted the boat. Now, that was, of course, at the time of writing. I believe they are heading off a sail tonight. Now, has the entirety of the media called this out, threatening activists with imprisonment? No, they had other ideas. Sky News ran this headline. Greta Thunberg rejects accusations of anti-Semitism as she embarks on second flotilla to Gaza. Well, in fact, actually, multiple outlets ran that headline. Why is the media making articles about anti-Semitism on a humanitarian mission? Oh, well, that's right, because Israel said so, and the media did their job as good little Israeli propagandists. Israel later accused the group of activists of being anti-Semitic, an accusation Thunberg told Sky News Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins she rejects. It is not anti-Semitic to say that we should not be bombing people, that no one should be living in occupation, that everyone should have the right to live in freedom and dignity, no matter who you are. What a controversial statement. Helena, Ben-Gvir is a truly, truly depraved person, isn't he?
Especially given he is already somebody who is convicted of terrorism in Israel. Under Israeli law, he's a fucking terrorist, right? And he has the gall to say, well, we need to detain Greta Thunberg because she's a terrorist now. Apparently Greta Thunberg is Hamas. Apparently that's the reality that we live in now. Little girls, she's not a little girl anymore, she's a grown woman now, but like that's the way she's perceived in the way in which that she's discussed in the international discourse. Apparently she's now a terrorist because, of course, the line has been this whole time is that we can't let food into Gaza because it goes to Hamas. Hamas are the ones who take the food, and therefore anybody trying to aid the Palestinians is doing so to try and bolster Hamas by providing them aid that they can steal. That's the reality. But of course, Ben-Gvir is going to try and say this because as far as he is concerned, as far as anybody on the Israeli right wing is concerned, anything that gets in the way And the thing, anyone who gets in the way of their divine mission to reclaim the lands of Judea and Samaria that they were promised all those years ago can be smeared and can be undermined regardless of the veracity of those statements that are made, because the ends justify the means. If it's a divine mission, they're on a mission from God, why the hell would it matter whether or not it's a smear or whether or not that they engage, whether or not he himself is a terrorist? Because at the end of the day, all that matters is fulfilling that mission.
Yeah, absolutely right. And obviously, when I say these people are monsters, it's the Israeli state as well. But Ben-Gvir, as a person, is terrible. Of course, it's so funny. He's a literal terrorist himself, calling other people terrorists. But this is what the right wing do. This is what they do. It's projection. It's almost that's where they get their ideas from, right? That's how they know how to call other people things, because they look, into themselves. But absolutely agree. A horrible, horrible man. Let's go to our producer for your comments. I know you've been very busy in the chat. We've had a pretty good stream today. I mean, over 130 concurrent viewers. Callum, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm not so bad. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Really, really well. Thank you.
Good. It's been a great show so far. Just to kick us off, we have got a number of super chats. Graham has sent $4.99 saying, "Well said, Helena." And that was following the first story. That was your comments on the first story of the day, Helena. So thank you, Graham, for that. Third Eye Blind has said, sent £5 and said, "Farage sadly has stolen a big chunk of working class mindshare with his lies and othering." I don't know if either of you want to say anything about that.
Well, I would like to see, I don't know if you've seen any, Helena, like a breakdown of class when it comes to reform. Because I think there's the bigger thing here is age, right? Obviously, older people are voting reform, but we do hear a lot about, they fooled the working class. I do want to know how many working class people are actually voting reform.
Okay, so what's really important to understand here is that when people talk about class in this country, they use a thing called the NRS social grading system to decide who's what class, right? And it's the worst grading system. It is in no way an actual representation of what people's class interests are. And so there's ABC1 that is usually treated as middle class, right? And like some of the A's would be upper class, but most people fall into middle or working class within this social grading system outside of some very kind of individuals in society, top 5% or whatever it is. And then there is C2DE. And the way this grading system was set up was for an industrialized economy where, 40, 50% of people worked in factories or were on production lines. And the reality is that's like 8% of society now. So, for example, there's a huge glut of society who are people who work on very low wages with very bad conditions, who are living in rented accommodation, who don't have expendable income, who have bad pensions, whatever it might be. But because their kind of work that they do, for example, is working in a call center, doing data entry, because it's like in an office or like in a contact center, like it's sitting in a chair, tapping on a keyboard, it gets treated as C1. And therefore, apparently, these people are middle class, right? People who are working minimum wage in call centers under this grading system are counted as middle class. And that is a huge sector of society. People working on the floor in retail. Again, people who do administration work. Again, these are not highly paid. These aren't highly paid workers. And because they're younger people, there's a big age distinction here. And younger people are far more likely to work in the service sector since we've moved to a service economy and industrial manufacturing isn't really here anymore. Because they're younger, they're far more likely to be treated as C1. Even people who are not earning very much, who have really important roles in society, who are treated as skilled workers like nurses and teachers, they get treated as B. They're the second highest category under the NRS grading system in terms of social grade. And lots of nurses have to use food banks. Yet apparently they're high-earning middle-class people by the social grading system. So that's the first reason why there's this idea that reform represent the working class, even though most people who actually work in society, they voted for Jeremy Corbyn, for example, as well. Like you say, Jeremy Corbyn was a middle-class leader. I'm like, well, no, he got not just the plurality, the majority of working age voters in 2017 and 2019. It was only the retired who kept him out of Downing Street. And the second thing, when you point to the age distinction, is people will determine class by access to university education, which in the yesteryear, when these kind of grading systems were created, the reality is that it was a very small elite echelon of people who went to university, right? And that's the case because there was restrictions based upon the level to which the you could get into university because they were very elite, they were very selective, because they could afford to be, because it's publicly funded. In a liberalized world where they want to make as much money as possible, the entrance has gone right down. They want to get as many people, so they've stopped being selective.
It's
not make grades.
signifier.
Exactly, it's not make grades go down, but literally half of young people nowadays go into higher education. So it's not a distinguisher of class. They come from all backgrounds. In fact, more working class people go to university nowadays than they did pre-liberalization, because they're not trying to be class exclusive than they were before. And so this means that young people who overwhelmingly vote left wing, far more likely to have university degrees or have been through higher education, therefore get included based upon what is an age cohort who vote left wing into seeing as a middle class lefty socialist, when in reality there are people with degrees working in fucking Tesco.
McDonald's as well.
I mean, like that's what they say. Oh no, it's the left. They're left wing because they've been indoctrinated by the education system in universities. No, there's a class reason behind it, right? And also, what is a university degree today? It's not as privileged as it once was. Personal anecdote, but at 18 years old, I worked for RAC, breakdown care, but I was on the phones. So I did inbounds call center. Fucking hated it, by the way. I do not recommend call center jobs. It's the worst job I've ever had. And I'm 18 years old, right? And there were people in their 30s who went through university and sat in the same spot as me. And I thought, fucking hell, the job market must be fucked, first of all. I got there, I failed the interview, but my brother worked there for years and they just got me the job in there. It's literally nepo shit, right? Yeah. And there are people in their 30s who have got degrees, and you just know it's not the same anymore.
But that's the story that's repeatable across the country. I mean, again, it's an anecdote, but when I was at uni myself, I had a part-time job in McDonald's, and I worked alongside people that were mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s. There was one guy in particular comes to mind who had a degree in one of the sciences. I think it was like theoretical physics or something insane. Christ. And he was there shoveling fries in McDonald's. Not that there's anything wrong with working in a fast food restaurant. We need people to do those jobs, but having a degree even in something like a Bachelor of Science, for example, doesn't indicate class, because you can be doing that and not be earning a fortune and working in a middle class job. So
exactly. So like for the things like under the things, it was worth pointing out that in those call centers, literally the way in which our media and our political class and people who do pollsters, for example, they would have treated you all as middle class, right? You were earning shitty wages in a call center because you're sitting at a desk, you're all C1s, you're all middle class. It's a ridiculous system. So that's why people here, Reform UK have won over working class people. A lot of older people vote for them. And again, people who usually have houses, who own houses, pretty good pensions. For example, if you started working in the 70s, for example, when trade unions were far better represented and pensions were better. So the reality now is that there's this huge glut where the older generation more likely to work. The older generations were more likely to work in manufacturing, less likely to have degrees, but they're wealthier. But they vote Reform, and there's a smaller cohort of people there who were of university degrees, and so it makes it look like it's a working class thing, when in fact the reality, of course, is that the one thing that determines class is your relationship to production. And has anyone's relationship to production changed just because you were somebody who got a degree or you worked in service sector rather than manufacturing? No.
I brought up Vicky's comment because yes, I did work in Aztec West. So Vicky, you must be from Bristol. You just must know the area. But yeah,
I think she's just been stalking you, Curtis.
Maybe, but that's where I worked, and never set foot in Aztec West again or the office buildings because God, I hated it.
Yeah, I don't blame you. To be fair, they can be quite soulless jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
We've got. I hope this means something to you, Curtis or Helena, because it means nothing to me, I'm afraid. Sorry, Rachel. Rachel Atwood, $5. RE political correctness. You all need to watch the ever quotable PCU. Would you blow me where the Pampers is tonight at the pit? Everyone gets laid.
Not a clue. Not a single clue.
Sorry, Rachel. We'll check it out for you.
Yeah, it's what I forgot. Vicky is actually from Bristol. I'm sorry, I forgot. Like, it's hard to remember. You worked for Orange Mobile. Ooh.
Just speaking of Vicky, actually, Vicky's also said, R10 left, this is much easier for me to read rather than that pink background, thanks. This is in relation to the change that we've made to our graphics.
Yeah. We had a bit of a slight upgrade with graphics, and the white background with the black text is much easier to read.
Yeah, we've had some trolls in tonight, but we've had this comment from the Supreme Commander, self-named. The left only makes matters worse, stealing citizens' hard-earned money to pay for their bullshit agendas. Any quick rebuttals on that one?
Well, I want to know what agendas they're talking about first.
I mean, there's like the right wing steal money to pay for taxes so that they can ever expand the military-industrial complex and the police force. Like, at least we try and do it for social programs that help people and stop crime. All they care about is maximizing the authoritarian size of the state.
Which, by the way, the right always says that they hate the state, but traditionally you always see the right love the state. I mean, Donald Trump and the so-called libertarian wing or the libertarian movement in the US absolutely love the state. It's exactly the same as free speech. We want free speech. We hate censorship. And then suddenly it's free speech for me, not for thee. I mean, you people are all inconsistent. I would have far more respect for right-wingers, who I vehemently disagree with, if we could have honest debates, right? Misinformation and disinformation is running the roost in today's society. And I yearn for intelligent debate with a right-winger. I don't get one. Right, maybe I should talk on GB News.
Yeah.
That's one, because they're never going to get decent people on there. But even online, I want a decent intellectual conversation, and maybe we both learn something. Who knows? But it's just full of people who contradict themselves or use straw man arguments about our own opinions.
It's so frustrating, Alex. I feel like I've tried so hard to understand where right-wingers are coming from, to try and find out, well, they've got a different ideology to me, they've got a different set of moral principles to me, like they're not utilitarians like I am. You look at like the heat map meme that's going around, in which we there's different levels to which that we perceive sectors of society to be relevant to our interests, like smaller circles rather than bigger circles, which is the difference in kind of conservatives and like liberals on the left. And I try and see things from their perspective and go, well, I understand you think this, but I have this different opinion, and this is why. And the right wingers just go like, well, all leftists just want to take away your toothbrush, and they hate aspiration, and they want everyone to be in their little fucking grey boxes in communo land. And I was just like, not even communist states were like this. Like, the idea, it's just all you just repeating propaganda. Because again, most people who've iterated or people come to right-wing beliefs do so because of propaganda, not because they've iterated it themselves. And I'd happily have conversations with the Tim Stanleys of this world, who, despite my disagreements, and Tom Harwood, I at least understand that they've iterated their positions from first principles, even if we disagree. But the vast morass of right-wing, including people who are influential on the right wing, have platforms, the Konstantin Kissins of this world. I can't see any iterated belief system here other than just, I heard these things and it made me feel bad. I'm like, sorry, well, yeah, the feelings are not relevant in this conversation.
I think the epitome of right wing opinion is my hurty feelings. Which again, it's
so true.
It was Ben Shapiro who coined the term "facts don't care about your feelings," right? But it's always about hurty feelings for the right wing. I don't like immigrants because they hurt my feelings. We need to do this because it's bad. I'm like, give me a logical reason. But I suppose, I mean, as someone who's also utilitarian, that I guess that only happens on the left. I don't know if there's any right-wing utilitarians or anyone on the right who's called themselves a utilitarian. Don't know.
I mean, that's the big gap. The big gap between, I guess, it's more liberals and conservatives, really. There are plenty of both utilitarian and more kind of virtue ethics type leftists, but the kind of liberal conservative, it is the utilitarian gap more broadly. Conservatives do fundamentally value things like purity and tradition. Yeah. But us, as strict utilitarians, we have no desire to care about. I mean, and I still, like, we were having a discussion about inheritance tax on Novara the other day, and I was like, well, I've not earned any of it, right? But I was like, well, my point was, well, a lot of right-wingers, we don't agree. They fundamentally have this real kind of moral position on how family is like the central building block of society. It's this inner circle that you're supposed to protect. I'm like, okay, why is this suddenly take primacy over the social utility when it comes to state policy? I just don't get it. I probably never will.
Feelings.
Yeah. Just to push on, just in response to us not knowing PCU, Rachel sent another $2 and asked, have you at least seen Animal House?
Nope.
I'm afraid not.
No,
I'm not even heard of it.
Yeah, we're not earning these super chats from you,
I've just
Rachel.
Googled, is it National Lampoon's Animal House? Probably is.
While you're looking for that, Third Eye Blind has also sent £2 and said United Kingdom of Gammon. So
another thing the cry bullies cry about. They always say about, you know what,
It's a
I want to
racial
offend
slur.
people. Yeah. No. Oh, look, if you're offended, who cares? And me say stuff like gammon. They're like, oh my God, hurty word. You can't say that. Right wingers are the biggest cry bullies. My God.
And the
Absolute
worst part,
snowflakes.
The worst part as well is you say that they're far right and they go, oh, I'm not far right. I just care about the identity.
just right.
I care about nation. I'm not. I care about the nation state and the interests of indigenous British people. You would say someone who's on the far left, you're far left. We go, yeah, I am.
Based.
I am a Marxist. I am far left. Well done, you. Shall we have a discussion about the issues here?
Right, we've got quite a few to get through. We've only got a few minutes, so we're going to fly through. So our friend Kat, I don't know what else to call you, Israel labelling Greta as a terrorist just shows it's a label governments can use against political opponents without any real meaning or reason.
True.
100%. 100%.
True. So true. And again, exactly. This is what's happening with Palestine action.
Yep.
Yeah.
They've not done anything terroristic. Nothing that they've done is even approaching terrorism. But it is a weapon that the state uses to silence their critics.
Their own security information literally said, I mean, we've seen it from declassified with the leaked documents. It literally said they do not pose a threat to national security. They're completely or almost completely non-violent. And yet, Yvette Cooper says there's more to know about Palestine action than you know. Well, there isn't because we've seen the fucking documents, right? They're not violent. They're not violent. They're not a danger to national security. Even the intelligence people know that. But the government decided to prescribe them anyway. It's only 2024. And that's what we know about, right? This is before what happened on the RAF base.
And I think it was another 114 people today have been arrested in London, if I've seen the news correctly, for showing support for Palestine action. So I mean, if these protests keep happening and people keep being arrested in these numbers, the Home Office are going to have to either release this alleged top secret information that they apparently have that shows that Palestine action is this really terrible, awful terrorist group, or they're going to have to concede that they got it wrong and reverse the decision, because when the civil disobedience against this is happening in such numbers, this is going to continue until one thing or another happens to move forward with this. So I'm sure it'll be a matter of time before Yvette Cooper gives us this proof. Or not, because she probably hasn't got it, has she? Let's be honest. Froggies has said, I learned never again in school. What did all these racists learn?
Never again only applies to white people, by the way. I mean,
that's true.
When you look at, for example, when we're talking about the refugee crisis at the moment, no one's saying send the Ukrainians to Rwanda. No one's saying remove the rights from the... I wonder why nobody, when Richard Tice said, oh, well, immigrants should have fewer rights than everybody else, why did Ben Kendish not come across and say, what about those Ukrainians?
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, they all supported the Ukrainian resettlement scheme. Likewise with Hong Kong. Again, it's about geopolitical interests as well as about racism too. Obviously, we're the geopolitical enemy of China in our State Department, or in the terms of the British state and what they perceive it to be. Likewise with Russia. So we will do things for people who are their enemies, and it's fine. But suddenly, it's our fault. We invade Afghanistan. We fund the Mujahideen in the 80s. We fuck up their country for decades and decades and decades. They come over here, we can't accept you. We can't admit fault. We can't admit fault.
And the state actually paid people as well. The state offered money to house Ukrainians. So this whole discussion around, it's too expensive to have refugees, and yet the government was turning around and saying, we are going to pay you to house them. It's such a double standard. I think for the politicians, it's racism and geopolitics. For those that don't really follow geopolitics, it's obviously just pure racism.
Yeah, 100%.
We're going to have to wrap up just for time, but just really, really quickly, just a quick fire. We've got William. Clearly attacking ECHR is just so that they can abuse people. Immigrants is a gateway to the rest of us. Completely agree. Zuki said, immigration saved our ass, helping the rebuilding of the country post-war. Do white nationalists have any idea where we'd be without that pivotal support, which I also thought was important. And Odin, Allfather, has said, it's funny how all these self-selected nationalists that want to deport people all have strange non-British names. But isn't that one always the way?
Nick is that Italian?
Yeah,
it sounds Italian. One thing about before we finish up, one point about the ECHR. Well, the reason why the ECHR was drafted was essentially to stop the spread of communism in Europe. It was supposed to explicitly be a position where you could enshrine private property into these kind of human rights to stop the spread of Marxism-Leninism from the East. Well, if we remove ourselves from the ECHR and there's a Marxist-Leninist takeover in this country, people like Farage and Tenconi and Tice, if they get their way, well, you got what you wanted.
Yeah. I did want to just show this one. This is quite cool from Jacqueline. Turn Left should start their own movie night for Patreon members, and then we can vote for the movie out of the selected list of movies. That's really cool. I don't know how that would work though. Would that be like streaming? Because my god, the monetization. I mean, the channel would get fucking deleted if we did that. But Jacqueline, if you're not in the Discords, join our Discord and maybe explain further. But that is all we have time for. Thank you, Callum, for the comments. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. Of course, thank you to Helena for joining me. It's always such a pleasure. It isn't going to be too long, actually, so I believe, unless, any sort of circumstances change, you should be here with us on Wednesday, which is double Helena in 1 week. I mean, we should be so lucky. Again, thank you to all our viewers who tuned in. Make sure you go and subscribe to Helena at No Justice MTG and all the platforms. We are going to raid into her anyway, so don't go anywhere. You can see more political content from her. Remember to like this stream, and if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. If you want us to grow, then head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you could be Alternatively, you could become a YouTube member for just 99p. You can see me back on Wednesday. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.